If you are a United States citizen, a green card holder, or someone waiting for an immigration case to be approved, especially if you are 65 years of age or older, I want you to stay right here with me for the next few minutes. You may have seen alarming headlines this week talking about new citizenship rules, seniors, and sudden changes. And if those words made your heart beat faster or caused a quiet sense of fear about your future in this country, that reaction is completely understandable. When headlines sound urgent and your status feels personal, fear can arrive before facts do. And I want you to know this right away. That concern you're feeling is valid. It doesn't mean you're overreacting. It means you care deeply about your stability, your family, and everything you've worked for. But here's the reason you should keep watching. A lot of what is being said online right now is incomplete, exaggerated, or missing critical context. Some of the headlines are technically based on real updates, but they leave out the most important parts, the parts that actually determine whether these changes matter to you at all. My goal today is not to alarm you or add to the noise. My goal is the opposite. I want to slow everything down, strip away the confusion, and explain clearly and calmly what actually changed, who these updates truly affect, and just as importantly, who they do not affect. Because for the vast majority of people watching this video, the reality is far less frightening than the headlines suggest. And by the end of this, you should feel more grounded, more informed, and far more confident about where you stand. Now, before we talk about the rules themselves, it's important to understand why news like this feels so intense, especially for seniors. Immigration headlines don't hit like ordinary news. They don't feel distant or abstract. They feel personal, almost threatening, because they touch something fundamental, your sense of home. If you are over 65, you've likely spent years, maybe decades, building a life here. You've worked, raised families, contributed to your community, followed the rules, and planned your future with the assumption that your place in this country is secure. So, when you see words like rule change or citizenship update, your mind doesn't just think about paperwork, it jumps to worst case scenarios. What if something goes wrong? What if something I earned could be taken away? That emotional response is not weakness, it's human. Immigration systems are complex, and when information is delivered without clarity, fear fills the gaps. Social media makes this worse by rewarding urgency over accuracy. Headlines are designed to make you stop scrolling, not to make you feel safe. They rarely explain who is protected, what hasn't changed, or how rare extreme outcomes actually are. So, people share what scares them. Fear spreads faster than facts, and suddenly it feels like something major shifted overnight, even when legally it didn't. That's why this conversation matters, because there's a big difference between feeling threatened and actually being at risk. And understanding that difference, calmly, step by step, is the key to replacing anxiety with clarity. Before we go any further, I want to be very clear about the intention behind this conversation. This is not about stirring anxiety or feeding into worst-case assumptions. This is about restoring balance. Immigration rules can feel overwhelming because they are layered, technical, and often explained poorly in the public space. When updates happen, even small procedural ones, they're often framed as dramatic shifts, when in reality they are usually adjustments to how existing rules are applied. And when those adjustments are taken out of context, they can sound far more dangerous than they actually are. So what we're doing here is stepping away from the panic-driven narrative and looking at the situation the way the system itself does. Slowly, deliberately, and based on facts rather than fear. I also want you to hear this clearly. Nothing we are discussing today is about sudden loss of citizenship, mass denials, or targeting seniors as a group. There has been no overnight change that strips people of rights or closes the door to citizenship for older applicants. The immigration system does not work like that. It is built on procedures, timelines, documentation, and due process. That doesn't mean it's perfect or easy, but it does mean changes don't happen secretly or without structure. Understanding that structure is what gives you stability, even when headlines suggest chaos. And once you understand where you actually stand within that structure, a lot of the fear begins to lose its grip. Now, I want to take a moment to introduce myself so you know who's speaking to you. My name is Timothy, and for several years now, I've been closely following immigration policies, procedural updates, and the real world impact these rules have on everyday people, especially seniors and long term residents. I created this space because too often important information is delivered in a way that creates confusion instead of clarity. I believe people deserve explanations that are calm, respectful, and grounded in reality, not sensationalism. I'm not here to rush you, pressure you, or overwhelm you with legal jargon. I'm here to walk with you through what's happening, one piece at a time, so you can make sense of it without fear. It's also important for me to say this up front because transparency matters. I am not an immigration attorney, and I don't work for any government agency. What I share is educational information based on publicly available policy guidance, official announcements, and long term observation of how these processes actually play out. This is not legal advice, and it's never a substitute for speaking directly with a qualified immigration professional about your individual case. Every situation is different. What applies broadly may not apply perfectly to you, but understanding the broader picture helps you ask better questions, recognize misinformation, and approach your own situation with confidence instead of panic. With that foundation in place, let's talk about what actually changed this week. Because once you understand the nature of these updates, you'll see why so many of the alarming claims simply don't hold up. What actually happened this week has far less to do with who is allowed to become a citizen, and far more to do with how certain parts of the naturalization process are handled, especially for older applicants. For years, the immigration system has included specific accommodations for seniors, recognizing that age can affect memory, language learning, and test taking ability. Those accommodations are still in place. What's been updated is the way officers are instructed to verify eligibility for those accommodations and how documentation is reviewed during interviews. In other words, this is about procedure, not permission. It's about consistency, not restriction. Some of the recent announcements focus on ensuring that age-based accommodations are applied correctly and uniformly. That means immigration officers may pay closer attention to documents that confirm a person's date of birth and the length of time they've held lawful permanent resident status. This isn't a new concept. These requirements have always existed. What's different now is the emphasis on how they are checked and recorded in the system. When this information is presented accurately and consistently, the process tends to move more smoothly. When it's unclear or inconsistent, it can cause delays or additional questions. That's not punishment, that's process. The problem is that when these procedural clarifications are summarized online, they're often described as new rules without explanation. That wording alone is enough to make anyone nervous, especially when age is mentioned alongside it. But a procedural clarification does not mean the government suddenly decided seniors are unwelcome or unqualified. It means officers are being reminded to apply existing rules carefully and document their decisions clearly. This kind of update happens regularly across many areas of government, not just immigration. It's part of how large systems try to standardize decision-making. Now, this is where one of the most important clarifications comes in, and I want you to listen closely. If you are already a United States citizen, whether you were born here or you became a citizen years ago through naturalization, these changes do not alter your status. They do not reopen your case. They do not undo your oath. They do not place you under review simply because you're over a certain age. Citizenship once granted is not casually revisited, and procedural updates to how new applications are handled do not retroactively affect people who have already completed the process. I want to repeat that in plain language because I know many people need to hear it more than once. If you are already a citizen, nothing that was announced this week takes that away from you. Your rights remain intact. Your status remains secure. You are not suddenly at risk because of an administrative update aimed at current applicants. The fear that many seniors are feeling right now often comes from not knowing whether a change applies to the past or only to the present and future. In this case, it applies only to people who are actively going through the naturalization process now or who plan to apply in the future. And even for those individuals, this is not about creating new barriers. It's about making sure the correct rules are applied to the correct people. There has been no announcement eliminating senior accommodations. There has been no age cutoff introduced. There has been no directive instructing officers to deny older applicants. Those claims simply are not supported by the actual guidance. Understanding who is not affected is just as important as understanding what changed. Because once you clearly separate yourself from the group an update applies to, fear starts to lose its power. And even if you are in the process of applying, knowing that this is about documentation and verification, not eligibility or intent, changes how you prepare and how you approach the process. In the next part, we're going to talk specifically about seniors who are applying for citizenship, what accommodations still exist, and what these updates mean for them in practical, everyday terms. Without jargon, without panic, and without assumptions. If you are 65 years of age or older, and you are in the process of applying for citizenship, or planning to apply, this is the part that matters most to you. For many years, the immigration system has recognized that seniors face different challenges than younger applicants, especially when it comes to testing and language requirements. That recognition hasn't disappeared. In fact, it remains built into the process. If you are 65 or older and have been a lawful permanent resident for at least 20 years, you may qualify for what is commonly known as the senior accommodation. This allows for a simplified version of the civics test and, in many cases, the ability to take that test in your native language with the help of an interpreter. These accommodations are still available. They have not been removed. They have not been quietly taken away. What the recent updates emphasize is the importance of clearly showing that you meet the requirements for those accommodations. That means your documents should consistently reflect your age and the length of time you've held permanent resident status. Officers may ask more direct questions or look more carefully at dates to confirm eligibility. This doesn't mean they're suspicious of you. It means they're following clearer internal guidance on how to apply the rules correctly. When your paperwork is organized and consistent, this usually works in your favor, not against you. Think of it this way. The system isn't asking seniors to jump through new hoops. It's asking officers to make sure they're using the right rules for the right people. And that distinction matters because when misinformation spreads, it often sounds like seniors are being singled out or restricted, when in reality, the accommodations that exist for seniors are the very reason these procedures are being clarified in the first place. The goal is accuracy, not exclusion. Unfortunately, this is where myths start to take over online. You may have seen posts claiming that seniors are now being denied citizenship more often, or that applying at an older age is suddenly risky. These claims are not supported by the actual policy guidance. There is no evidence of a blanket denial trend based on age. There is no hidden policy aimed at discouraging older applicants. What's happening is far less dramatic and far more bureaucratic. And while bureaucracy can be frustrating, it is not the same thing as hostility. Another fear I want to address directly is the idea that making a small mistake on your application could now lead to serious consequences. This fear has caused many seniors to feel paralyzed, afraid to apply, or afraid to move forward with their case. Here's the truth. The immigration system has always distinguished between innocent errors and intentional deception. A typo, a wrong date written accidentally, or a forgotten address from years ago is not the same as fraud. Officers understand that people make mistakes, especially when dealing with long histories and complex forms. In most cases, minor errors can be corrected. You may be asked to clarify something or provide additional documentation. That is a normal part of the process, not a punishment. Intentional fraud is different. Deliberately lying about major facts to obtain immigration benefits has always been taken seriously, and that hasn't changed. But that standard applies to everyone, not just seniors, and it has existed long before this week's updates. Confusing these two things, honest mistakes and intentional wrongdoing, is what fuels unnecessary fear. And that fear often leads people to assume the worst, even when the system itself is designed to allow for explanations and corrections. What's important to remember is this. These updates do not change who you are, what you've contributed, or whether you deserve to complete the process you started. They don't erase decades of lawful residence or suddenly redefine your eligibility. They simply reinforce how officers are expected to review and verify information. And when you understand that, the process becomes something you can prepare for calmly rather than something to fear. There is one word that has been quietly fueling a lot of fear behind the scenes, even when people don't say it out loud. And that word is denaturalization. You may have heard it mentioned in passing, or you may have seen it buried in a comment or a post, often without explanation. When people hear that word, especially seniors who became citizens later in life, it can feel terrifying. It can sound as if citizenship is fragile, temporary, or conditional. So let's slow this down and talk about what it actually means, because the reality is very different from the fear it creates. Denaturalization refers to the legal process by which naturalized citizenship can be revoked. But here is what is almost never explained clearly. This process is extraordinarily rare. It is not administrative, it is not automatic, and it is not triggered by paperwork errors, misunderstandings, or changes in policy. Denaturalization requires the government to prove in court that a person intentionally committed serious fraud during the naturalization process or concealed extreme facts, such as involvement in war crimes, terrorism, or major criminal activity that would have made them ineligible for citizenship in the first place. This is not a quiet review. It is not a secret action. It involves formal legal proceedings, evidence, judges, and the opportunity for the individual to defend themselves. It does not happen because someone misunderstood a form years ago. It does not happen because an officer later interprets a rule differently. It does not happen because of political shifts, age, or where someone was born. And it does not happen randomly. For the overwhelming majority of naturalized citizens, denaturalization is not something that will ever intersect with their lives. The fear surrounding it comes largely from misunderstanding its purpose and its rarity. When you hear about it online, it's often presented without context, as if it's something that could suddenly apply to anyone. That simply isn't true. It's also important to understand that procedural updates to the naturalization process do not create new pathways for denaturalization. Adjusting how current applications are reviewed does not retroactively change the standards that apply to people who became citizens years or decades ago. The legal threshold for revoking citizenship remains extremely high, and it has not been lowered by anything announced this week. If this topic has been weighing on you, I want you to pause with me for a moment. Take a slow breath in, hold it briefly, and then let it out slowly. Fear has a way of tightening the chest and speeding up the mind, especially when the stakes feel so personal. But fear is not the same as danger. And understanding the difference between the two is powerful. Immigration is not just a legal system, it's an emotional journey. It touches identity, belonging, safety, and the future you imagine for yourself and your family. When those things feel threatened, even indirectly, the stress can be heavy. If you've been carrying that weight quietly, wondering whether something you earned could somehow be taken away, I want you to hear this clearly. The system is built on laws, due process, and protections. It is slow, sometimes frustratingly slow, but that slowness is not accidental. It exists because decisions that affect people's lives are not meant to be made impulsively or without safeguards. Being informed does not mean being afraid. Preparation is not the same as panic. And caring deeply about your status does not mean your status is unstable. It means you value what you've built. Right now, the most important thing you can do for yourself is to stay grounded in accurate information, not amplified fear. Because when you replace uncertainty with understanding, your sense of control begins to return. And from that place, everything else becomes easier to face. Now let's shift from understanding to action, because knowing what you can do right now goes a long way toward restoring a sense of control. Regardless of where you are in your immigration journey, there are a few practical steps that can help you feel more prepared and confident. The first is organization. Keep your important documents together in one safe place. This includes your green card, passport, naturalization certificate if you already have one, copies of applications you've submitted, and any notices you've received. When documents are organized, questions feel manageable instead of overwhelming. Another important step is keeping your information current, especially your address. If you move and don't update your address with immigration authorities, you may miss critical notices about appointments or requests for information. Missing a notice can create unnecessary stress or delays. Updating your address is a simple step, but it protects you from problems that have nothing to do with eligibility and everything to do with communication. If you are currently in the naturalization process and you have an upcoming interview or test, preparation does not mean fear. It means familiarity. Review the civics questions that apply to your situation. Make sure you understand what documents you're expected to bring. Arrive calmly, on time, and with the understanding that the officer you meet is following a structured process, not looking for reasons to deny you. Interviews are meant to confirm information, not to trap people. When you approach them with that mindset, the experience often feels far less intimidating. There are also situations where professional guidance can be helpful. If your case involves complicated circumstances, such as extended time outside the country, prior immigration issues, or a criminal history, it may be wise to consult with a qualified immigration attorney. That doesn't mean something is wrong, it means you're being proactive. There are also nonprofit organizations that offer low-cost or free legal assistance, especially for seniors and low-income individuals. Seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's a form of self-respect. Another area that causes a great deal of anxiety is waiting. Processing times have been a challenge for several years now, and many people feel stuck in silence for months at a time. It's natural to assume that no news means bad news, but in most cases, that assumption isn't accurate. Immigration systems handle millions of applications, and delays are common. A lack of updates often simply means your case hasn't reached the front of the line yet. Waiting can be emotionally draining, especially when you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. But silence does not equal rejection. If your case is still within the normal processing time range for your application type and location, patience, however difficult, is often the best course. If you are significantly outside the normal time range, there are ways to inquire about your case through official channels. These inquiries are a normal part of the system and do not harm your application. Travel is another topic that often comes up during periods of waiting, particularly for green card holders or those with pending applications. In general, lawful permanent residents are allowed to travel internationally, but the length of time spent outside the country matters. Extended absences can raise questions about whether residency has been maintained. If you anticipate being abroad for a longer period, there are steps you can take in advance to protect your status. And if you have a pending naturalization application, travel is usually still permitted, but time outside the country can affect certain residency requirements. These are not reasons to panic, but they are reasons to plan thoughtfully. The key theme here is this: most challenges in the immigration process are procedural, not personal. Delays, requests for documents, and periods of waiting are frustrating, but they are not signals that something is wrong with you or your case. When you understand what's normal, you stop interpreting every pause as a threat, and that understanding gives you something incredibly valuable: peace of mind while the process runs its course. I want to speak directly to those of you who are seniors, because your experience deserves to be acknowledged plainly and respectfully. Many of you have spent decades building a life in this country. You've worked hard, paid taxes, raised children, supported grandchildren, volunteered in your communities, and followed the rules even when they were confusing or slow. Your connection to this country is not temporary or casual. It's lived, earned, and deeply rooted. When you hear sudden talk of changes or new rules, it can feel like everything you've built is somehow being questioned. But that feeling does not reflect reality. Your presence here is not fragile, and your contributions are not invisible. The accommodations that exist in the naturalization process for seniors are there for a reason. They exist because the system recognizes that aging brings different challenges, not fewer rights. Memory works differently. Language learning takes more effort. Test environments can feel more stressful. These are human realities, and the system has long acknowledged them. That acknowledgement hasn't vanished. The path to citizenship remains open to you if that is the path you're on. And if you are already a citizen, your place here is not being reevaluated because of your age. What often gets lost in online discussions is the difference between vigilance and fear. Being careful with documents, paying attention to notices, and preparing thoughtfully for interviews is wise. Panicking over headlines designed to provoke clicks is not. Fear has a way of shrinking the world until it feels unsafe and unpredictable. But the truth is, the immigration system, while imperfect, is governed by laws, procedures, and due process. Decisions are not made impulsively. There are protections, appeals, and safeguards built into every step. That structure exists precisely to prevent the kind of sudden, arbitrary outcomes that people fear when they read alarming headlines. If you've been feeling tired, stressed, or emotionally worn down by all of this, that's understandable. Immigration journeys are long, and for seniors, the stakes can feel even heavier. But it's important to remember that strength doesn't always look like pushing forward without emotion. Sometimes strength looks like pausing, gathering accurate information, and refusing to let fear dictate your next move. You've navigated complex systems before. You've adapted, persisted, and built stability in the face of uncertainty. Those same qualities are still with you now. So let's bring everything together and focus on what truly matters. The updates discussed this week involve procedural clarifications in the naturalization process, particularly around documentation and verification for certain senior accommodations. They do not eliminate those accommodations. They do not introduce age limits. They do not retroactively affect people who are already citizens. If you are already a citizen, your status remains secure. If you are applying for citizenship, the key is organization, accuracy, and calm preparation, not fear. Denaturalization remains an extremely rare legal action reserved for serious intentional fraud and requires full court proceedings. It is not triggered by small mistakes or policy updates. Processing delays, while frustrating, are common and do not mean something is wrong with your case. Travel is generally permitted with planning and awareness of residency rules, and most importantly, none of what has been discussed represents a sudden crisis for seniors. It represents the normal, ongoing evolution of administrative processes within a large system. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to thank you for staying with me and choosing understanding over panic. If this explanation helped you feel calmer or clearer, consider sharing it with someone who may be feeling anxious right now. And if you'd like to stay connected for future updates explained in the same calm, straightforward way, you're welcome to like this video and subscribe. Your questions and comments are always welcome, and they help guide what we talk about next. You are not alone in this journey. Stay informed, stay grounded, and take care of yourself and the people you love.